Hi everyone, and welcome to this just after launch talk. So we are going to have a interesting time to have you running after lunch about specifications. So my name is Marta Rybczynska, and here's my colleague, Mikael.
Oh yeah, my name is Mikaël Barbero. I'm head of security at the Eclipse Foundation. So for those who don't know about the Eclipse Foundation, we are an open source software foundation. So we host and steward open source projects. You might have heard about the Eclipse IDE. A bit louder. About the Eclipse IDE. So it was our very first project 20 years ago, but we now host a widely diverse set of projects in the cloud native Java ecosystem, but also in the IoT world or around the software-defined vehicle ecosystems. So as an open source software foundation, we provide a set of services to our projects, including governance and stewardship. So we ensure that the projects are run in a vendor-neutral environment. We provide services around IP management, licensing management, and we also provide marketing. We organize conferences so that basically we do everything so that our open source projects thrive. Something that we do also is to provide IT infrastructure, and we've been doing that for a very long time. And a new thing that we've been focusing on for the last 3 years is around security. With the last couple of major events that happen in security in open source, speaking about Log4Shell, of course, but many others, we decided to invest heavily in providing better security services and tools to our projects. And with that goal, given that the forthcoming regulation are happening around the world, including in the US, but also in Europe with the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, we created a working group called Open Regulatory Compliance to gather key stakeholders from the industry and provide them with a neutral forum so that they can discuss and elaborate the specification for open source projects in order to help the key industry players to comply with the forthcoming regulations. So we managed to gather stakeholders from widely diverse location of the ecosystems. And we do that by the goal of ORC is actually to provide the interface between those open source communities and those key stakeholders so that they can communicate and they can interact directly with the regulators, especially in Europe, because we are focusing first with the CRA. So currently the ORC members, the members of the working group include large industries, large manufacturers, software manufacturers in Europe, but also in the US, so that the top two lines with different level of involvement. But one key feature of this working group is that we actually managed to gather most of the open source, other open source foundation as well in this working group. So the Apache Software Foundation, the FreeBSD Foundation, Python, Rust, PHP, and so on and so on, they all came to the ORC working group and they are all participating to the writing of those specifications for compliance with the forthcoming regulations. The participating, sorry, to the writing of the specification for forthcoming regulations. Marta,
So, as Mika has said, the first focus of the ORC is the Cyber Resilience Act. And the first focus that we have in this Cyber Resilience Act work is to have a look of and start writing a vulnerability management specification. Next slide, Mika. So, what does the CRA say about vulnerability management? In fact, it talks a lot about vulnerability management. There is even a special part in the Annex 2, in Part 2, that is just talking about vulnerability management, saying that the information about fixed vulnerabilities must be released, that there must be a policy of coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and parties must communicate for example, reporting upstream found vulnerabilities. And there's more, there's way more. We also want to show a different fragment. Next slide, Mika. That's the Recital 76. That's also quite important for that. So it's repeating the coordinated vulnerability disclosure policy, and it requires to have a structured process to deal with vulnerabilities. They ask, if possible, for machine-readable security policies, and they propose programs like bug bounties. So this is quite there's quite much that we have in the main text of the CRA about vulnerability management. That is not very surprising to people who do vulnerability management, because there's nothing unexpected in that. Next slide, Mika.
So, of course, we, as we said, we are focusing on vulnerability management, and we said that we were writing a specification. The goal is definitely not to create one new specification or one new standard that will that will unify all the definitions. Our goal is really to focus on the CRA requirements and to write those specifications. So let's take a look at why some other specification or standards don't really apply or don't really fit our needs there. Of course, there are the ISO IEC standards, but as you know, it's not available for free, and I'm using the word gratis there for emphasis on the money part. And of course, for open source communities, it's most of the time a showstopper. Then there are the BSI technical recommendations, especially the part 3 about vulnerability report and notification, but it's very heavily oriented toward enterprise usage and enterprise requirements for the CRA, so it doesn't really fit the open source requirements. Then there is the amazing work from the OpenSSF around the guide to implementing a CVD process. We took a lot of inspiration from this and also from other standards, but the issue with this guide is that it's non-prescriptive, so you cannot really define by following this guide whether you comply or not with the requirements of the CRA. And there is also the OWASP cheat sheet around vulnerability disclosure, and same as for OpenSSF, the guide, it's non-prescriptive, so hard to define compliance or not. And there are also guides from the NIST and other federal agencies, so around vulnerability disclosure, but it's very heavily directed for federal agencies. And there is also the CISA vulnerability disclosure policy templates, but again, it's only a template, so it doesn't provide you much in terms of assessment for compliance. So here we are really not trying to define yet another standard to unify them all, to rule them all, but specifically targeted to CRA compliance. Marta?
So we have 5 main goals in writing that specification. You probably already see them from the description of all the specifications and standards. So first goal is to have a short document. We deal with open source projects. Quite often maintainers have very limited time, and having an 80 pages document to read to understand how they should run vulnerability reporting, that may be really a showstopper. So we want to have it as short as possible, so it's easy to use and understand for every project, even the smallest one. Then we know that the community has been running vulnerability reporting processes for years, and there are a lot of best practices. So we don't want to change practices that work. What we want to come with is a set of common standards, common practices that everyone agrees on, and we want to reach an agreement in the community of what is the core set that everyone agrees with. Of course, we want to have it consistent with the CRA, because that's our main goal. Then tailored for open source, but when we've been writing this, we realized that for many companies that will also work just fine, so they could use this specification as is. Then we want to make it available to everyone. So use an open source license that allows that. So those are our five main goals while working on the specification. And then the next slide, please. Then how did we approach it? So we assembled the best practices from the community to extract the main points. And then we have created clear requirements, clear must, shoulds, recommended, so that people can easily match their policy or they can easily create a policy. As said, we are limiting the size, trying to write it in a consistent way so it's easy to read and short. Of course, we are working in an open source foundation with many open source foundations and companies working on open source. So this is a project under an open source license. And to let people use all the richness of the different guidelines that exist and people can use it, we link two different guidelines from the main documents to allow people to go and find more information or more detailed processes if they want. Next slide. Yeah, so where are we? The first draft is available and it's around 2 pages, and discussions in the community has already started. Next slide. And as for any good open source project, it's available in Git, so you can find it in the ORC working group GitHub organization, and you will find the vulnerability management spec. You can access it, comment, post your issues, post your pull request, as in any open source project. Next slide. And the current state, we have musts, main musts that fit on screen, on a single screen. So the one must is to have a process of vulnerability handling. Another that we have put is a method without creating a separate account. Then adhering to coordinated vulnerability disclosure in opposition to no disclosure or full disclosure, as it is defined according to CRA. Then we say must to link to the reporting policy. Then clearly defining who, as a person or a group in the organization, is dealing with vulnerabilities. A must for reporting to upstream projects, and then publishing all resolved vulnerabilities. That is our list of musts, and there are some other shoulds and recommendations.
So obviously there is nothing shocking or nothing that should be really controversy for anybody attending to the conference today. But this is the good enough set of specification that we find could meet the CRA requirements and could be good guidance for all open source projects and manufacturers to comply with these requirements. So the timeline is to have an RC1 by the end of April. So please join the discussions and provide comments and feedbacks on the current state of the specification. Why do we want to have the DRC1 so fast, end of April? The main goal is to be able to provide such a document, such a specification in this state to the regulators. The Commission, the European Commission, has a mission to create an attestation program and also some guidance for open source projects to comply with the CRA. And we hope that this specification and other that we will be working on shortly after can serve as a basis for the foundation work, for the commission work, sorry, in establishing those guidance and those attestation programs. So that's for the European Commission side, but at the same time, for CRA compliance, there are harmonized standards that are requested by the European Commission to European standard organizations like Sensenelec and ETSI. And we also want to provide this specification as an input to those standard organizations and to make this input the results of community work. So from all open source foundations that we listed earlier, and also some key manufacturers that participated to the working group. And so we really want to put the emphasis on that it's a result of a consensus within the open source communities and communities with an S towards this work. And we want to replicate the same kind of process for all the specification, all the requirements of the CRA, and of course, other regulation when the time, when it will be required. So it was a very short presentation, but now we have 10 minutes or more even for questions, so feel free to ask them. I think you have to go to, no, there is no microphone. You will run with the microphone. Okay. People will run with the microphone for us. Questions.
Hey there. I was just curious, do you feel that the European Commission is going to give a stamp of approval to this effort to sort of effectively say, okay, open source projects that comply with this standard would effectively comply with the CRA provisions? Is that the plan? At least that's my understanding, right?
Yeah, so I understand the question. So first, neither Marta or I are a lawyer. Don't take any business decision on whatever we will say. But as far as we understand, the Commission cannot declare anything other than the harmonized standards as a way to comply with the CRA. So eventually only case laws. Unfortunately, we'll decide about that. But they will issue guidance, so they can say that this is a good way to work towards compliance. I guess that will be some kind of wording like that they will use.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
You're welcome. Marta, feel free to chime in if you want to add something.
Sure.
I am shocked that you have all of this in 2 pages. I know your goal is that you want to keep this consumable, that it's understandable by even an organization that does not already have a mature vulnerability disclosure and management process. This might just be a project management kind of question, but how are you trying to both keep it consumable and simple enough for everyone to understand, but also be comprehensive enough and prescriptive enough? You said that was your goal, to meet the CRA requirements. I'm just curious how it seems like a 2 very conflicting goals. So what's kind of your approach about keeping it both prescriptive and short?
Marta, you want to?
Yeah, I was. First, we didn't tell you 2 pages in which font size. But that's a joke apart. So we have been working with security policies and vulnerability reporting policies. It's called different ways in different open source projects. So we have been working with that for years, and we know what the typical use cases are. And they are not that hard to extract and to write down what's the critical part. The advantage that we have is for all the detailed proposals or procedures, we can link to guidelines outside. So we do not, for example, say what kind of a bug tracker you should use. we say that you should have a reporting method. It may be a box tracker, it may be a mailing list, and then for people who want to know what are the best practices to do it, there are many guidelines available when they have a look if there's something they did not know. And then my personal opinion is that the CRA, in my reading of the CRA, it stays pretty generic. So it doesn't have, in most cases, it doesn't have very specific and detailed requirements. It has more generic requirements. And for a big part of that, the open source community has already worked on answers and has them. So we are just referencing the typical policies that are there. We already have many comments pending and people discussing different things. So we will see what will be the final size when we take into account comments from different use cases. We'll see. I'm really curious.
There's also a question from Liliana on the Discord. Can anyone provide comments and feedback, even if not part of the open source implementers community?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an open source way of collaborating. So the GitHub is open to anybody to open an issue, open a PR. Eventually, the release of the 1.0 or the release candidate will be vetted by the member of the working group, but all contributions are welcome.
Cool, thank you.
Is there any kind of specific feedback that you're looking for? Any specific areas that you would like contributions, or just a general review?
Could be both. Definitely, we are. So the draft, the current state, it was really to get the ball rolling. There is nothing harder to get people to collaborate on a white page. So we wanted to have something first to start the discussion, to initiate the discussions. So it can be full review or just nitpicks on some wording. And we already have a couple, and we also had just had the full review with lots of comments about cross-references and stuff like that. So any feedback is welcome.
Another quick one for me.
Yeah.
Is there any, do you have any sort of plan to also provide some tools to open source projects to sort of allow them to either keep track of whether they fulfill this criteria, or to automate some of that testing? Like, for example, all vulnerabilities must be resolved. That's the kind of thing that could be fairly easy automatable. Or do you want to map this to some of the other efforts? Like, I think the scorecard project from OpenSF has something along those lines as well.
So the goal of the ORC working group is really to write the specifications. The tools is a bit outside of the scope, at least for now. We more rely on other organizations to do that. There are efforts in parallel with various entities in Europe to create some tools to ease or to lower the cost for compliance with the CRA, specifically targeted at small and medium enterprises. And this kind of tooling about whether they fix the vulnerabilities and the tracking and everything you can think about is in the work. And we are collaborating with some of them. We are participating to the consortiums to provide those specifications as input, so that the tool maker can work based on this. Thank you everyone for your attention. And
Thank you, Marta and Mikaël.
Thank you.